actually bring me back to my youth, to Bruce Lee, and for me as well, Monkey. I do, however, as a Swansea lad, feel it's kind of ironic I'm introducing somebody from Cardiff, because two Welsh cities are actually kind of off loggerheads, particularly in terms of soccer. And often, like Swansea and Cardiff, mean violence ensues. So I hope that's not too ridiculous. Well, as a master of theoretical and practical martial arts, I'm sure that I'll get this. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you and thank you.
Thanks very much. So, the politics, the pedagogics, already in our practice, the pedagogics of unlearning. This, to me, is an unusual and awkward phrase for what I think is an unusual or awkward formulation. And to make my own sense of it, I had to translate it and to expand it and unpack it in my own way. And inevitably, I think there are going to be other ways and other translations of the term. But to me, the phrase or formulation, Pedagogics of Unlearning, as entitled this conference, seems to be asking to be translated as something like, this conference seeks to be about how to emancipate ourselves from everything we ever thought we knew about the logics of teaching and learning. Or to unpack this more fully, this conference seeks to be about a good thing called how to emancipate ourselves from a deluded condition vis-a-vis everything we ever thought we knew about an implicitly bad, or at least suspect thing or group of things, at least to the extent that we need to unlearn it or them called the logics of teaching and learning. But does this mean that the conference theme is therefore about establishing how to be great teachers and how to facilitate the best learning? I don't think so. And moreover, there are already plenty of conferences and publications about that sort of thing, and they certainly aren't organised by such an awkward and unusual formulation as Pedagogics of Unlearning. In fact, I imagine that the phrase Pedagogics of Unlearning was chosen by two naughty boys specifically to signal a distance and difference from conferences concerned with teaching and learning. In other words, it looks to me like there's a deliberate inversion and twisting involved here, which means that even if we are also interested in ditching the worst and keeping the best when it comes to pedagogy, we need to maintain this difference in orientation as a difference in orientation. So what do I think this conference formulation is asking us to do? I think that it's asking us to interrogate all of the key nodal points and rhetorical, conceptual and ideological coordinates that implicitly and explicitly organise the constellations of thinking, theorising and discoursing on pedagogy, whether dominant or conventional, folk or professional. And why might this be important? Is it merely philosophical or entirely academic? Maybe, yes. But also, such interrogation could come to challenge, reorientate or reconfigure pragmatics and pedagogics in any number of ways, which could be good. Yet wouldn't this simply be another way of saying that this conference seeks to be about how to unlearn the worst in teaching and learning practices? And if so, why this awkward tarrying with the negative? After all, to cut to the chase, doesn't everyone want to come up with the best pedagogics, the best forms and contents of teaching? I think so, and for any number of reasons. However, when it comes to a consideration of formal education in schools, colleges and universities, this matter seems incredibly overburdened with a very familiar argument, which runs something like this. Matters of teaching and learning matter because education matters. And education matters because its forms and contents, but more importantly its values, help to produce certain kinds of people, certain sorts of subject, and hence it matters for the very fabric of society. As many have argued, contemporary governments more and more regard the school, possibly also the university, as both the focus and the method, the target and the paradigm, the concept and the field for implementing not just educational policy, but policies of all kinds. It is as if educational institutions are there purely to be tinkered with, as if they are machines to be manipulated in order to produce a regularized, predictable product, subject like sausages from a sausage factory. In other words, education is effectively regarded as an ideological state apparatus. And today you don't have to be an Althusserian to think this. Indeed, the belief that educational institutions are incalculably important, politically and ideologically, is something that everyone, from the most conservative to the most radical of thinkers, seems to agree on. This is why it so easily seems so logical to want to get rid of or unlearn the bad and to institute the good. What other reason for this conference could there be? I can think of at least one other possibility. Maybe we need to unlearn this very argument, to disarticulate the presumed homogenizing connection between pedagogy and politics, perhaps in order to save what Derrida called the hospitality or the promise of the openness of the university in the face of generalized ends and outcomes-orientated managerialism. If we could uncouple the connections that have turned all educational contexts into little more than the crucibles, laboratories, and fields of educational policies, then this could in itself be radical and transformative. Such would seem to be part of the rationale of this conference. Certainly, state education seems overburdened with all kinds of policy baggage. And on the one hand, this seems like a bad thing. But on the other hand, to reiterate, as I've already proposed, I think that by and large, we all tend to assume that education is always and already, inevitably and necessarily, a key battleground of and for hegemonies of all kinds. Certainly, we all have certain axes to grind and certain horses that we back. Hence, we do or we don't want creationism or evolution to be taught in schools. And we do or we don't want multiculturalism championed or denounced. And we do or we don't want the learning of facts by rote. And we do or we don't want the encouragement of free critical thinking, and so on. So far, so paternalistic. However, the real problem for academics seems to emerge when all of this arrives or returns to knock on our own door, specifically the departmental doors of our own university, when we perceive the presence and force of hegemonies working or trying to work on us, and we feel the forces of dictates other than those of our own axes and our own horses. And it strikes us as outrageous, and we come over all Kantian. The university should be free, we say, and we denounce either the politicisation or the depoliticisation of the university. And we want to change it or halt it, even though in a sense we are merely experiencing what we say we already knew. The fact that educational institutions are key locations in any kind of hegemonic block or formation. It's only that we feel that we should be exempt, because we are the philosophers, not the poor or the uneducated or the children. Or if we can't be exempt, if we have to be included, we dislike this because this is not the hegemony we would prefer. If it were the hegemony we wanted, then we'd think we were free. But it's not, and we don't like that. So we say it's a crisis, and we want to police the crisis, or ward off the crisis, perhaps through the magical alchemy of polemic and critique. But maybe things have already gone too far. Or maybe it's just that I've already gone too far. Maybe my translation of the title, The Pedagogics of Unlearning, need only be rephrased as a question, perhaps like this. How do we rid ourselves of the instituted delusions of what Jacques Rancière called the explicative order, and rid ourselves of all of the deleterious consequences of various kinds of pedagogy, from the stultification of individual souls to the generalized maintenance of inequality? This is a Rancièrean question, of course, or one that I forged using some of the terms that Rancière uses. Furthermore, my translation, interpretation of the conference title and the general field of problematics to be engaged is clearly Rancièrean too. This is because I recognized in the awkward phrase of the title the presence and effect of a reading of Rancière's book, The Ignorant Schoolmaster. Plus I found out that Professor Rancière was to be our closing keynote, so I put two and two together, ignored all the other prompts in the conference irrationale to think about this in Lacanian or Derridian terms, and came up with my present translation and interpretation. So, Regarding my Rancierian question about whether we can rid ourselves of stultification and inequality by education, the short Rancierian answer would be no. No, we can't get rid of these things. We can't rid ourselves of stultifying pedagogy, and we certainly can't eradicate inequality. Not en masse, not institutionally, not through policy. As Rancière writes at the start of Education, Truth, Emancipation. You've already done it. There is no social emancipation and no emancipatory school. Jacotot strictly distinguishes the method of emancipation, which is the method of individuals, from the social method of explanation. Society is a mechanism ruled by the momentum of unequal bodies, by the game of compensated inequalities. Equality can only be introduced therein at the price of inequality, by transforming equality into its opposite. Only individuals can be emancipated. And all emancipation can promise is to teach people to be equal in a society ruled by inequality and by the institutions that explain such inequality. Only individuals can be emancipated, argues Rancière. But you can't institute this. You can't bottle it. You can't standardize it. It demands both an intimacy that no social planning or policy or instituting can guarantee, and if schooling is needed, you need an ignorant schoolmaster. What is an ignorant schoolmaster? Rancière is not coy about this. The ignorant schoolmaster, that is to say, one who is ignorant of inequality, addresses him or herself to the ignorant person, not from the point of view of the person's ignorance, but of the person's knowledge. The one who is supposedly ignorant, in fact, already understands innumerable things. In other words, Rancière constructs an intimate pedagogical relation and an egalitarian one. Emancipatory pedagogy proceeds on the basis of an assumed equality. It says, if you don't know, work it out. You know how to work things out, so try. The pedagog's job is to say, come on, work it out. I want you to solve this riddle, and I intend to verify that you've done it. Famously, Rancière argues that the emancipatory relation still involves will dominating will. We do not all become laissez-faire hippies. But crucially, the pedagogical relation is not to be perceived as one of knowledge versus ignorance, or intelligence versus stupidity. These latter interpretations of the pedagogical scene are, in Rancière's terms, stultifying. As he writes, Jacotot did not see what kind of liberty for the people could result from the dutifulness of their instructors. On the contrary, he sensed in all this a new form of stultification. Whoever teaches without emancipating stultifies, and whoever emancipates doesn't have to worry about what the emancipated person learns. He will learn what he wants, nothing maybe. He will know he can learn because the same intelligence is at work in all the productions of the human mind, and a man can always understand another man's words. Now, it deserves to be mentioned, this is not just any old argument. This argument has a central place in almost all of Rancière's work. That a man can always understand another man's words is arguably a premise central to all of Rancière's political thinking. And nowadays, people, the Rancièreans, feel confident with this argument. But I would like to note that in The Ignorant Schoolmaster, Rancière immediately continues this paragraph with a quick anecdote. Jacotot's printer had a retarded son. They had despaired of making something of him. Jacotot taught him Hebrew. Later, the child became an excellent lithographer. It goes without saying he never used the Hebrew for anything, except to know what more gifted and learned minds never knew. It wasn't Hebrew. This is a very provocative passage. It's also very problematic, and it's central to what I want to think about in this paper. It plays on my mind quite a lot of the time in lots of different contexts. However, before I move on to that, I have to add first that in order to think about all of this in terms of the pedagogics of unlearning, we need to remember two things about the ignorant schoolmaster. The first is that Joseph Jacotot was already a popular teacher before he discovered anything about pedagogy. The second is that he discovered or realized, the second is that what he discovered or realized is that you can teach people stuff that you don't know, and or in reverse, that you can learn without being taught. So when Jacotot taught the son Hebrew, what most likely happened was that he told the son to go off and learn Hebrew, or maybe he even supervised him, in the sense of making sure that he was studying, rather than checking what he was doing while he was studying. Because remember, Jacotot wasn't teaching in the sense of imparting or communicating knowledge. He was merely encouraging, inspiring, or insisting that study take place, without policing the method or the result. Of course, the fact that the boy studied Hebrew, but never really learned Hebrew, yet nevertheless learned something, so much so that it may have helped him to go on to become a lithographer, if there is actually a connection here, is deeply interesting. Artists and educators of all sorts have been inspired by this kind of story. It seems extremely upbeat and enabling, but something bothers me about it, and it is the fact that Rancière allows the son to know that he does not know Hebrew. What bothers me about this is that Rancière thereby maintains a stability in the relation between knowledge and ignorance. The son knows that what he has learned when studying Hebrew was not Hebrew. This allows Rancière to convey very clearly, as if with a wink and a wry smile, his polemical lesson about pedagogy. Study stuff, you learn stuff. It might not be what it says on the tin, but it's still stuff, and it'll do you good. Yet in both its implicit affirmation of the production of other knowledge, which I think is why people like that stuff, we produce some other knowledge, different knowledge, and of the emancipation of the son through his learning of the fact that he can learn as an equal, the story eliminates an important element of undecidability. It keeps everything in its proper place, ignorance and knowledge. No one in the story knows Hebrew, but the son gains an emancipating sense of self-worth and distinction from the knowledge that other people don't know what he does know, which is that he doesn't know Hebrew. In this dimension of a clear distinction, or indeed partition or distribution, between knowledge and ignorance, this is what interests me. This is because there are myriad contexts everywhere in the world, in life, in different practices and discourses, where the disambiguation of ignorance and knowledge in this way seems impossible. Moreover, the interminable undecidability of ignorance and learning in most places is hugely functional and is what drives things on. And this is what every theory of discourse is enabled by. It's certainly what subtends postmodern Leotardian theories of the legitimation crisis in knowledge. It is, in other words, something of a fact of life, the undecidability of knowledge. In this light, and from this position, in what follows, I want to consider a few more contexts which might help us to interrogate the terms of our most common discourses of and on pedagogy. However, I won't take any of my examples from the realms of either the school or the university. This is because I think that to do so would allow us to indulge in our easiest post-structuralist fantasies about the ideal typical pedagogical scene. The post-structuralist fantasy about the ideal typical pedagogical scene is neither arboreal, nor rhizomatic, nor virtual, nor mediated. Rather, it is basically a fantasy about a really great literature seminar. So I want to stay as far away from this fantasy as possible. I want to stay away from it for lots of reasons. But now that I've mentioned it, I will give you at least one reason. One reason for this is, to me, too much post-structuralist thinking and writing about learning still seems based on or at best, an overvaluation of, and at worst, a repressive hypothesis involving modernist literature, as if the evil instrumental rationality of the world has really got it in for the heroic minority still invested in the saintly endeavour of reading really difficult literature. But what happens if we broaden our frames, or even invert and displace them, in order to think about pedagogical scenes and relations that are rather far removed from the school or university classroom? If we think about pedagogical scenes and relations that differ from the wordy, logophiliac, or indeed logocentric preoccupations that tend to be preferred by post-structuralist thinking about pedagogy, it would seem reasonable, surely even overdetermined, to include practices of the body. Now, I've argued before that an excellent case to consider when thinking about teaching and learning, in terms of Rancière's arguments about emancipation and stultification, is none other than Bruce Lee. As I argued in the piece that I wrote for Michael O'Rourke and Sam Chambers in their Borderlands journal issue, Jacques Rancière on the Shores of Queer Theory, Bruce Lee actually proceeded in a very Jacototian manner. Moreover, and more importantly, he was not alone. But he also blazed a trail, and this seems important. To borrow and mangle a phrase, others followed without following. Bruce Lee was very much an autodidact. He was iconoclastic, hands-on, inventive, verificationist. He was also the author of a massively influential magazine article called Liberate Yourself from Classical Karate, which argued, in effect, that most martial arts pedagogy insists on, produces and intensifies deference, reverence and conformity via the institution of hierarchies and hence feelings of inferiority and inequality. Martial arts pedagogy produces robots, he argued. It stultifies. And it does so because true insight into what he called the truth and reality of combat cannot and should not be institutionalized in the ways it has been. Think of classes of dozens, if not more, white pajama-clad students standing in rows, performing rote drills of kicks, punches and blocks upon the shouted commands of the instructor. You know these classes. That's from the Karate Kid. Best scene. Okay, shouted commands of the instructor. As a counter-image to this, Lee fantasized the figure of the founder of a martial art. He characterizes this figure as fluid and dynamic, as able to move freely and to honestly express himself. The problem comes, he argues, when this figure's followers try to capture the essence of the genius and insight of the master, or indeed when he or anyone else tries to formalize it. It is at this point of formalization that everything goes wrong. The genius is lost in the very effort to preserve it. This is because the genius of any martial art could be said to lie not in the accumulation of its techniques, but rather in the ability to actualize its meta-principle in a potentially infinite array of singular circumstances. In other words, no, not in other words. I retract in other words. Block that from your mind. However, let's go back. Lee clearly identified with precisely such a founder figure. Clearly he's writing about himself. Right? This would certainly express his ambivalence vis-à-vis what he himself had been teaching to his students during the final years of his tragically short life. For a long time, he had merely taught what he called Junfan Kung Fu, and given that Junfan was one version of his name, this did not signify a style as such. It just meant Bruce Lee's Kung Fu school. However, in 1968, Lee became enamored of the combination of the Cantonese terms for stop or interrupt, which in Cantonese and Mandarin is jit. It's a very common term in martial arts, Chinese martial arts, jit, which means interrupt, and hit, which in Cantonese is kun. This is because he believed that the highest aspiration in all martial art is to block and strike simultaneously, to interrupt another's attack, jit, and to hit, kun, simultaneously. So from 1968, Lee termed his style Jeet Kune Do. As the name Jeet Kune Do referred solely to his preferred highest principle and aspiration, or the art's meta principle. However, by the time he was becoming really famous, from 1971 onwards, Lee allegedly regretted naming his approach at all, because the name implies an entity, a fixed identity, with a stable form and content, and Lee wanted what he did, and what his friends, training partners and students did, to keep evolving. Shortly before his untimely death in 1973, he even told his senior students, and everyone, to stop teaching completely. The jury is still out about exactly why he did this. The most ungenerous interpretation suggests that Lee did this because he was worried that because of his growing celebrity, his students would be exposed as inferior martial artists, something that would inevitably reflect back on him. Other interpretations refer to the fact that because his film career had taken off, he knew he couldn't devote enough time to this part of his life, so he sensibly shut up shop. But another, equally viable interpretation relates to his thinking about the pedagogy. It is his own senior student, Dan Inosanto, who now regularly reiterates this point. Jikundo, says Inosanto, is something that can be taught and learned, but that cannot be formalised, institutionalised, or standardised. It demands an intimacy that no institution can guarantee. You either get it or you don't. Consequently, Inosanto himself claims that whilst he teaches a range of martial arts classes to anyone, only select individuals are invited or accepted into his Jikundo classes. That's loosely with his teacher, man. But none of this is radical. Indeed, it bears family resemblances to one of the most traditional institutions in Chinese martial arts pedagogy, the tradition of the indoor student. This is a student selected by the master as the one most apt to carry the torch forward, who is therefore given considerably more and considerably more private, even secret and intimate attention. We might evaluate this tradition in any number of ways. In Deleuzian terms, again, it's arboreal. In Derridian terms, it's inseminatory rather than disseminatory. In Rancière's terms, it may be either stultifying or emancipatory. However, what is clear is that it demands intimacy. Now, there is an ambivalence in post-structuralism about intimacy. On the one hand, as we see in Derrida's reading of Socrates, Plato, pedagogical intimacy can be phonocentric, metaphysical, dominating, constraining, and so on. But on the other hand, the intimacy implied in the post-structuralist fantasy scenario of a seminar group of close reading and the close discussion of a difficult modernist literary text is sometimes put on a pedestal and raised to the status of being just about the only kind of authentic revelatory event, the only one that post-structuralists seem to know about anyway. Might this fetish or fantasy be something we should unlearn? In either case, there does not seem to be any of this ambivalence about intimacy in Rancière's work. In The Ignorant Schoolmaster, we have illiterate fathers coaching their children in learning to read by making them connect the sound of the words of the Lord's Prayer with the marks on the page, and whole classrooms of students learning all manner of sciences, languages, jurisprudence, and legal argumentation without any formal content being transmitted from the teacher or anyone else to them. All that seems required for ignorant schoolmastery is the alchemy of egalitarian address and hierarchy of wills. But this type of relation is precisely the one that post-structuralism most seems to worry about. However, post-structuralism seems very comfortable with some other types of intimacy. For instance, it demands extreme intimacy with the textual supplement, specifically with the book. Yet it's much less comfortable with the idea of intimacy with the pedagogue. Rancière or Jacotot repeats this in a way. Rancière-Jacotot demands an intimacy with the text or other object, whether that be a riddle or a problem to be solved or whatever it is. But he also seems to require a definite distance between teacher and student, or between master and autodidact. The ignorant schoolmaster addresses the student as an equal, but also exerts his or her will. There is a definite personal interaction from instruction to encouragement to verification, but there is an absolute separation between the commander and the commanded. The teaching and learning both take place autodidactically, without the transfer of signified content from one mind to another. There's a great deal of importance in Rancière's treatment of Jacotot's approach. However, if it actually seems radical to anyone, I suspect that this is primarily because they haven't been paying attention to everything outside the text. For once pointed out, we can see precisely such relations everywhere. Just think of the sports coach, the drill sergeant, the sparring partner, the parent or grandparent, or indeed the younger sibling, or one's own students. Each of these, in their own way, merely demands that the student learn, or indeed, as in the case of the grandparent, uncle, aunt, or younger sibling, merely marvels out loud about this or that achievement. Unlike the martial arts sifu or sensei or master, or indeed the university professor, the sports coach does not necessarily embody or equal the highest level of skill in the activity. The sports coach is someone who drives the student on with carrot or whip, with challenges or praise, with advice and criticism and so on. But their charge does not necessarily learn anything from them. Similarly, the drill sergeant for Freud merely makes the students hate him by being a complete bastard to them, until they bond together through their shared hatred and then eventually love him as the person who made them what they are. A good sparring partner will simply present you with problems to be solved. Their fist will keep hitting you, their foot will keep kicking you, or you will keep ending up on the floor being choked out, unless you work out how to solve these problems. And as certain sociologists have shown, the clucking and cooing of the performance of amazement and pride carried out by older relatives can drive children on to greater and greater achievements of self-learning. Doubtless even the Nike slogan, "Just do it," has played on a loop in countless people's heads as they force themselves to learn how to go further or faster or better or more scary. Similarly, I know for certain that the words and movement images of Bruce Lee and other cinematic martial artists from Jackie Chan to Jason Bourne play out in montage behind the eyes of countless students and teachers of martial arts. One of my sparring partners used to quite audibly make film sound effects noises while sparring. I think we all do. No, but it used to come out. He'd go, throw a kick. Stop it, I was doing. You're interrupting the film that's playing behind my eye. The sociologist Louis Wacon, who spent 3 years immersed in the world of boxing in the Chicago ghetto, actually depicts the boxing gym as a habitus production and maintenance machine in which everyone and everything is a teacher. The professional boxers are to be emulated. The novices serve as reminders and yardsticks of development. And when the head coach shouts commands or reprimands at anyone in the gym, like, "What are you doing over there?" or "Keep your hands up," everyone in the gym responds. Because even if not directed at them personally, such words are, of course, universal injunctions in the gym, and therefore they are directed at them personally. We could go on and come up with different typologies and taxonomies of pedagogical relations and themes, ignorant schoolmasters and stultifying pedagogues in different realms and registers. But there's no need to do that. My point is merely that Jacoto's universal learning is universal because it is at least very widespread. It is the artifice of the inegalitarian institution that is the anomaly to be questioned. It's the shit that we do, that's real. It is. And again, neither Jacotot nor Rancière are unique here. Bruce Lee did precisely this in the field of martial arts, as have many others, and since, and surely before. Bruce Lee spawned a movement in martial arts whose imperatives boil down to an anti-institutionalism on the one hand, and an intimate, experimental, and verificationist ethos on the other. In other words, in its most radical versions, the Bruce Lee message can even be interpreted as, don't join the school or club, work it out for yourself. This is what Bruce Lee did. He walked away from, he actively renounced martial arts styles. By the late 1960s, he was saying that he no longer saw himself as practicing Chinese Kung Fu at all. But in his renunciation of styles and institutions lies the very problem of Bruce Lee. He never completed the syllabus of the martial art he studied in Hong Kong through his teens, Wing Chun. He went to America when he was 18 and soon started teaching. As a young hotshot, he made a name for himself. And in a context saturated by militaristically trained and sports-focused Japanese and Korean martial arts, Lee's Chinese Kung Fu performances stood out as something else. It was in the US context, saturated by katas and point-based competition, that Lee developed his belief that martial arts seemed to be in a sorry state. Currently, the martial arts are ineffective, he said. They are formal, rule-bound, artificial. They are full of strictures, a fancy mess, a classical mess, organised despair, stultified. And so he began to innovate. He maintained the Wing Chun center line. He added Korean Taekwondo kicks. He adopted the Western fencing stance. He emulated the techniques used by the best boxers with the most powerful jabs. He began to learn the grappling, ground fighting, and infighting styles of Japanese jiu-jitsu. He explored the weapon styles of the Philippines, and so on. But was this done in ignorance or knowledgeably? Can you really dip into a martial art, one whose practitioners insist it takes years to master, and pull out bits and pieces? Are you really able to evaluate them? Are you even able to perceive them? Some martial arts are based on the inability, a kind of legibility that you learn through years of study. You can't see what's going on in Tai Chi until you have studied Tai Chi and you've already had time. So you can't just say, oh, Tai Chi, because you have to study it for, say, 3 or 4 years. How can you go, I'm going to take this technique from Tai Chi, I'm going to take this from, how can you do that? So even perceiving. And this kind of activity now, this kind of bricolage, is nowadays easily sent up as a joke. There's an online comedy mockumentary series called Enter the Dojo. Write that down and Google it later. Enter the Dojo. And in it, Master Ken has devised his own martial art, ludicrously called Anecdote, right? Which views all other martial arts are bullshit. Karate, bullshit. Judo, bullshit, right? Anecdote is the one. It's fantastic. And the motto of Anecdote is, the best of all, the worst of none. The question that's endlessly asked about Bruce Lee is, was his new hybrid form a real, authentic improvement? Or was it that he could only have had the arrogance to think that any martial art needed improving because he had not actually finished the syllabus of any martial art? There are stories of Bruce Lee returning to see his teachers and classmates in Hong Kong after he'd been away training in the US by himself, believing he was progressing on his own. In these stories, we hear that Lee demonstrated how much he'd improved. His former teachers and peers, however, believed that he had not improved at all. Indeed, to their mind, how could he improve? He hadn't finished learning the syllabus, so he didn't even know what he was missing. Accordingly, in this discourse about Bruce Lee, we see, or I see, because I've been trained to see, a version of the kind of disagreement Rancière had with Althusser, which is a version of the disagreement Rancière had with Bourdieu, and so on. In this rendition, Althusser would be in the position of the old master. Bruce Lee would be the revolutionary student, rejecting the institution and instituting a new one. The conundrum is, do you have to go through the ranks of the institution before you can know enough to legitimately disagree with the institution or to be in a position to contest it legitimately? Is this logical, reasonable and necessary, or is it inegalitarian, hierarchical and possibly even stultifying? Rancière claims that people like Althusser and Bourdieu implicitly or explicitly held the former position, whereas he himself seems to advocate the latter. In the end, however, our decisions about all of this matter little, because this kind of thing happens in the world all the time anyway, and perhaps nowhere more so than in and around martial arts institutions. Schools, associations and styles are instituted, flourish, fragment and collapse or reform. Agreeing or disagreeing with this is like agreeing or disagreeing with the weather. There are heresies and there are factions, there are paradigm shifts and revolutions, there are mutations and transformations, there are translators and traitors. There is also the growing perception that all styles and systems are hybrids and bastards, each typically claiming a pure lineage, a completeness, a plenitude, and a unitarity that is actually only pure in that it is only purely ideological. Consequently, unlike Jacoto's printer's son, we are rarely, if ever, in a position to know with certainty whether our Hebrew is or is not really Hebrew. Your Kung Fu is not real Kung Fu. Your Tai Chi is hippie Tai Chi. My Tai Chi is real martial Tai Chi. Yours is a bastardized form. Mine is the original and best, and so on. This is martial arts discourse in a nutshell. Do you look rubbish? That's a different one. Your Tai Chi is not real Tai Chi, right? Is that real Tai Chi? How do you know it's Tai Chi? It's not what my teacher does. Okay, of course, it's easy now to say that we know that the idea of the original, like the idea of the authentic, is a red herring. So perhaps we can adjudicate in terms of better and worse. And this is the time-honoured question of martial arts. Which martial art is best? Which martial art works best? Which style would win? Whether or not Bruce Lee really knew the ins and outs of all the other martial arts, was his own construction objectively better or worse than others? Surely this can be decided, you'd think. Unfortunately, deciding this is like deciding which is the best move in rock, paper, scissors, scissors, paper, stone. Style against style is only ever person against person in context after context. In other words, interminably undecidable, which is perhaps why Bruce Lee never really engaged in polemics against specific martial arts styles. His problem was with the very idea of style, and specifically with the way styles were taught. Styles stultify, he argued. True learning is not about accumulation, but about reduction. You have to get to the essence. Hence, he proposed his approach, Jeet Kune Do, could be taught, could be learned, but could not really be institutionalized. It could not be formalized. It demanded an ethos and an intimacy. It was less about formal content and much more about attitude. Teaching and learning should be experimental, alive, moving, hands-on, verificationist, one-on-one. In learning Jeet Kune Do, they argued, one is in a sense only relearning, retooling, reorienting, reprogramming, rewiring, and rewriting one's own body. Learning how to honestly express yourself is the phrase that Lee would use all the time. This started in the 1960s. Bruce Lee became world famous in the 1970s. He either initiated or was at least at the forefront of a massive Jacotovian revolution in martial arts pedagogy that accelerated from that point on in the West, not so much in the East. Anti-institutional, inventive, verificationist, intimate, one-on-one, or two-on-one, or three-on-one, and so on. A lot of this inventiveness has proceeded in more or less complete ignorance of classical or formal martial arts disciplines. This anti-disciplinarity has, of course, produced new disciplines. MMA, or mixed martial arts, was, as its name attests, never meant to be one thing. But over time, it has become so. Kicking, punching, grappling, ground, with recognizable features and forms. Whence the paradox. The rejection of discipline is not freedom from discipline. All martial arts revolutions, all martial arts paradigms, all martial arts learning involve retraining one's body or bodily propensities. This can only happen both through and to the extent that what emerges is a discipline. Without the institution of discipline, inherited or invented, you get nothing. No change, no improvement, no event. The discipline can be adopted, like when you join a club, or it can be invented, like when you devise your own style, Anecdote, or Rex Kwando. Let's leave Rex alone. When you invent your own stuff, your own training regimen, it will always be implicitly or explicitly social, or invented from socially circulating materials, discourses, ideas, and principles. Most revolutions in martial arts paradigms and institutions that I know have involved the rejection of one discipline and the reciprocal construction of another. To stick with Bruce Lee, legend has it that he had a major rethink after ending one challenge match completely exhausted and dejected because he had not won the fight much more quickly and efficiently. Thus, the legend continues. He rejected a lot of the training and techniques specific to the style of Kung Fu that he had hitherto practiced, added weight training, running and other stamina training, boxing style training, and a whole range of pad work and bag work, as well as attention to diet. Some say he also took performance-enhancing drugs, or physique-enhancing drugs. However, much of the logic and structure of the Wing Chun nucleus remained active within his new creation. As Derrida put it, an institution is not just the four walls which surround us, it is the very structure of our thought. And Bruce Lee's thinking about combat can be said to have remained hegemonized by the structure of Wing Chun's implicit theory of efficiency in combat. not Wing Chun. It's very unwilling. That's like an anti-Wing Chun. Which raises an interesting question. Can discipline be unlearned? In an obvious sense, yes, of course it can. Lack of practice or improper practice means getting out of practice, getting sloppy, drifting away from the proper, forgetting, getting it wrong. This is as true of spending time away from training as it is for spending time away from academia, as it is for not practicing your foreign language, or even not practicing drinking your beer, and so on. There's discipline to all of this. Indeed, if we follow certain of the implications in Derrida's argument about the inevitability of dissemination, then the question might perhaps be reposed as one of whether it's ever possible to halt the drift and warps and discursive wending away from discipline. As Adam Frank argues in his ethnographic and genealogical study of Tai Chi Chuan in Shanghai, which is Tai Chi Chuan, Tai Chi, the same. One need only have a quick read of the so-called Tai Chi classics to realise that the art these 19th century texts are discussing is very different indeed from anything seen in the parks of Shanghai today. When you read the Tai Chi classics, what the hell are they talking about? They're talking about smashing people to bits, and they're talking about jumping higher and kicking lower, and it's, whoa, no, that's from the Tai Chi. There's no but there evidently has been in the past. This is because the styles have drifted, bifurcated, intermingled, been subject to fashions, fads, government policies, standardizations, the modernization movement of the early 20th century, Maoism, and so on and so forth, such that any practitioner of any form of Tai Chi Chuan today is literally embodying decades upon decades of writings and rewritings that they cannot but be largely ignorant of. The embodied practice is a material residue of historical layers and all kinds of interventions that are in effect the unconscious of the activity. On a related tangent, Frank also mentions the problem of the vacuum left in Shanghai's parks after the state crackdown on Falun Gong practice in the 1990s. Falun Gong's a bit like Qigong, but it got very religious and threatened the Chinese state, so they basically just arrested everyone. They're doing their exercise, and they just arrest them. Away, go away. Frank notes that in order to fill the spaces in the parks where Falun Gong practitioners had previously been, the government actually bussed in hundreds upon hundreds, even thousands of practitioners of a new, ancient art called Mulan Chuan. Right? Now, Mulan Chuan is passed off as ancient, but its first appearance in public was in the wake of both the crackdown on Falun Gong and the immediate global success of the Disney animation, Mulan. Needless to say, surely most of the now myriad practitioners of this sanitized and state-approved form are ignorant of its peculiar emergence or institution. It is only thanks to Adam Frank's publication of knowledge gained on his intimate ethnographic research that I have learned this myself. So can I even be sure that I know it? This may be a version of a Leotardian postmodern legitimation crisis in knowledge, but it also sums up a problem for anyone who practices what they may want to believe to be an ancient and timeless Chinese or Japanese art. Is this the real thing? Is my Hebrew really Hebrew? Do I really know Hebrew? Do I really know Tai Chi? Is what I know really Tai Chi? Interestingly, most practitioners of Asian martial arts, Western and Eastern practitioners, if not primarily Eastern practitioners, have not the faintest idea about or interest in the actual history of the art they practice. They may believe all kinds of things about a lineage stretching back to Bodhidharma or Zhang Zanfeng or the Shaolin Temple, but most martial arts are not allowed to have a history in the sense of change or development. And this is not necessarily either a problem of Orientalism or self-orientalization. Rather, it's a matter of what Derrida called teleopoiesis, the crucially important political process of evoking the ancient and unchanging as a proof of the present. Nevertheless, history moves, discourses drift, stabilizations disseminate, fashions jolt. There is no pure repetition in embodied or kinetic or any other kind of mimesis. There is reiteration, which equals the introduction of alterity. This goes on without our noticing. If we noticed it, we would try to halt it, because our aim is learning, not unlearning. But if it were, could discipline be consciously unlearned, deliberately rejected, and with or without a teacher? Can we unlearn the habits of our own lifetime? Can you teach an old dog new tricks? I would propose that learning something new, something truly different, is often likely to involve a reciprocal unlearning. To stay with the example of Tai Chi, I spent over a decade learning Tai Chi, after having studied several other martial arts at different times, for different lengths of time. The discipline of Tai Chi demands more or less exactly the opposite of everything I'd ever learned to do before. Learning Tai Chi involved unlearning so many accumulated habits, resistance, force against force, using strength, separation, speed. And I would have to say that this kind of thing could not have been learned by me without a teacher. However, the basic teaching was mimetic. Hands here, feet here, watch, copy. Hand, and there. But more gentle than that, because, you know, got to make a profit. Okay. The more advanced teaching was necessarily tactile or hands-on. Error was shown in terms of what happened to my body. Pain, being pinned in an arm lock or headlock or throw. Correctness revealed itself in terms of not getting trapped or thrown, or in terms of trapping, locking or throwing the other. The teacher's words were limited to commands, corrections, relax your shoulder, regain your posture, turn from the waist, yield, push. Unfortunately, this kind of bodily knowledge is all too easily unlearned. It requires such a high degree of proprioceptive sensitivity and control that if you don't use it, you lose it. You can remember it intellectually, you can discuss it in words, but your body loses the ability to know it and do it. So anthropologists and sociologists speak of bodily knowledge, embodied knowledge, the intelligence of the body. But I don't think they speak of bodily stupidity, or the stupidity of the body, even though there's a kind of etymological connection between stupidity and the inert body. Not etymological, traditional, old. Ignorance, perhaps. Bodies can be ignorant. Bodies cannot know, can be unaware, or indeed can ignore. We are unlikely to hear anyone say, other than in jest, my body is too stupid to do push hands, or my body is too stupid to do a jumping, spinning back kick. And you're unlikely to think you're more intelligent than your training partners if you beat them in any kind of sparring. You're merely likely to have trained harder, longer, or better. Everyone is equal. Anyone can knock anyone else out. One meaning of Kung Fu is simply the disciplined, sustained, skilled investment of time and effort. Every martial arts teacher knows that the distance between teacher and student can close fast, sometimes in an instant. Indeed, arguably, one of the basic reasons to teach students is to bring them up to a level where they can push you to make you keep up your own discipline. So, in conclusion, disciplines. They're invented traditions. The knowledge that disciplines produce is not only disciplinary knowledge, but also, and perhaps fundamentally, knowledge of the discipline. This is as true for academic disciplines as it is for martial disciplines. All have their reality tests, and modes and manners of verification and self-verification, or validation and self-validation. And very often it is possible for even contiguous work in contiguous disciplines to develop in complete ignorance of the work in the other field. This is not because researchers are lazy or stupid. It is rather that the metaphor for disciplinary work itself, specifically the word field, as in disciplinary field or academic field, is something of a misnomer. This is because today, at least, so-called academic fields are really rather more akin to halls of mirrors, in which you can see yourself and other objects reflected back at yourself in various shapes and sizes, but without really knowing where they are, and without being able to see anyone or anything round the corner or reflected away. Hence my proposal that we might now want to unlearn the argument about pedagogy as a key cog or ideological apparatus in a densely reticulated socio-political terrain. The very dominance in vocational, educational, employment vocabulary of the sacred term transferable skills attests to the fact that education is by and large not immediately connected with anything else, anywhere else, without an effort of translation and transformation. Unlearning disciplinarity may demand what Rancière once called indiscipline. There is inevitably some debate about what this might mean. I'll take one final look at the field of martial arts to see whether academics might learn anything from it. My take on the key feature of the most recent revolution in martial arts pedagogy, initiated by Bruce Lee but elaborated much more fully in various directions in his wake, might be summarised like this. Martial arts are to be unlearned because we have to concede that the reality that martial arts seek to master is not unified, univocal, predictable, or masterable. It is not the eminently manageable and manipulable space of the dojo, dojan, or guru. Instead, what has to be acknowledged is our ignorance of the chaos, unpredictability, and the traumatic effects of the eruption of the reality of violence. Probabilities can be played with, predicted, estimated, guesstimated, imagined. But, to echo Paul de Man, every answer to the question in the teaching and learning field, in the teaching and learning of martial arts, self-defense or combat skills should really be, perhaps. The new paradigm is based on the perceived need always to interrupt discipline before it settles down as system and settles into functional, as it were, to borrow a phrase from Derrida, offering reassurances to children. He said that about philosophy. That's the work of philosophy, offer reassurance to children. That's what martial arts do. This is exemplified in a spectrum of approaches. On the one hand, there are fighting systems that are based on acknowledging the likelihood that the destruction of most people's training by the chaos and violence of an attack. On the other hand, there are approaches based in psychology, sociology, and certain aspects of biology, specifically around the effects of what some authors call the chemical dump, or the explosion of often completely incapacitating chemicals within the body in the event of an attack, and so on. What all share is a principled commitment to indiscipline because of the unpredictability of reality, and hence the certainty of ignorance and the power of surprise. The surprise attack, the surprise of violence, in fact any surprise, can totally incapacitate anyone, but it's not necessarily always negative. Surprises come from everywhere. My final anecdote. When I first began studying Tai Chi, when my head and heart were filled with mysticism and Orientalism and magic, I complained to my Tai Chi teacher about a steep hill that I could never manage to cycle without stopping from exhaustion. He said, "That's because you're pushing with your legs. You have to pump from your dantiere," which is just below your belly button. "And then you'll get up the hill and you'll do so without becoming tired at all." So the next day I tried it. Lo and behold, what he said came true. So when I next saw him, I immediately reported with delight and pride that it had worked. He said, "Blimey, so it's true. I've never been able to do anything like that. Can you teach me how to do it?" Thanks, Sherman.
Okay, I'm sure you're all clamouring with questions and comments, so we'll just take one at a time.
So as Jacques Coutu and Jacques commenter have been addressed, I want just to make two short points. The first point is about intimacy. Well, in Jacques Coutu's example, of the relation between the ignorant father and the ignorant child, of course, the important thing is that is not the intimacy of the relationship. It is that precisely, in this context, intimacy is thought of as, well, the locus, the place of ignorance, And so the argument is about converting the place of ignorance into a place where knowledge can be created. So it's absolutely the opposite, of the normal relation of intimacy in pedagogy, which is based on the relation of the master who is the one who knows, and also the relation of the master to the good student. So the capacity of the master to say, oh, this is a good student, the one who is able to learn, so he will become my private disciple or student. So the first point, I think, for the notion of intimacy, we can cover many things, many different things. And the second point is about the ego. Because I think that probably, probably there is, in fact, in the French text, there is a joke that probably doesn't appear, in English. Even in French, you can of course miss it, and probably you miss it a little more, in English translation. When I was young, in French, ce n'est pas de l'hébreu, or c'est de l'hébreu, meant it is something unintelligible. So c'est de l'hébreu pour moi means I don't understand, it is unintelligible. So when the Jacotot says, and that's after him, that the son, this son, about I don't remember what was of his father, but not important. So this boy to whom Jacotot teaches Hebrew, and at the end of the sentence there is a mention that he knew at least one thing: it was not Hebrew. It doesn't mean at all, that the student is unable to know whether it is Hebrew or not. It just means, he knew that Hebrew was a language, like any other language. It was not kind of metaphor, unintelligible, It was a language like any other language. So I think perhaps it's important, to mention this because sometimes, English readers, miss the point, about the fact that it was not Hebrew.
So yeah, I showed a version of the paper to Richard Stamp, who is my friend and a French translator of Francia, and he pulled me up on this exactly. He said, "Oh no! In the original French, blah 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 blah, and it's so subtle and complicated." And I said, "Well, yeah, I don't care. I'm not changing. I don't care because that's the book that I read, and that's what it said. I don't care." Because that's what it says. So that's what it says. But I knew I kind of, if I could have predicted something, it would have been that you would go, "Oh, hang on, I actually wrote something that was ever so slightly more complex and slippery than this." But I just thought, yeah, okay, I'm going to do it anyway. I'm not scared. I thought Jack's actually really nice.
Thanks, Paul. I wanted to ask you a question about the pedagogical figure that's emerged across the process of your talk. And what worries me is that it feels to me that it's remarkably close to the kind of ideal neoliberal subject, somebody who is continuously seeing in the world the possibilities for self-investment, somebody that has to train in liquidity, someone that has to be aware of the surprises of violence which could come at any moment and train oneself to be able to cope with those things. This idea of resilience, this horrible notion of resilience, seemed to be kind of present. And also some ideas about sovereignty and autonomy I felt were kind of reinforced. And this might partly be because of the focus on the figure of the martial artist that was kind of the vehicle that you used to carry some of the ideas about pedagogy. So I wondered, is that a legitimate concern? Are there ways that we could think about the process of learning outside of institutions which don't fall into that idea of neoliberal continual self-investment of homo economicus?
Yeah. No, I think that's spot on actually. And I've thought about this. I've worried away at this. I've thought about this for quite some considerable time because I think that with the emergence of Bruce Lee and this kind of Bruce Lee and this anti-disciplinary sort of revolution, there is a question there about the relationship between this and many things: post-colonialism, postmodernism, globalization. The appropriation of the East. Like there's just, you name any of the major concerns of cultural studies, they're all there, right? In Bruce Lee. What the hell's going on? Is this racist? Is this Asiaphiliac? Is this Asiaphobic? Is this neoliberalism? Is this kind of like Zizek's and we just the brain? These people have arguments about who was the one who did like Taoismus? That Taoism. Zizek picks up on this and goes, Taoism is the ideology of late postmodern capitalism because it's an ideology of flows and not clinging, which sounds very much like Buddhism or Taoism. So I think that the question you have asked identifies a very, very important kind of, ideological question, ideological problematic. And I've kind of kept, the reason I've written 2 books about Bruce Lee is because I keep kind of, right? Like, I kind of think that, as an event, as a textual event, as a cinematic event, which is what Bruce Lee is, it's not about the man, it's not even about the art, it's everything is mediated through the films, the 4.5, 5 films. What does that mean? And of course it means in a very Barthesian sense, it means everything, it means nothing, it means so many different things. To me, the text is eternal because it means many things to one person. And so Bruce Lee, this is why I keep going back to Bruce Lee, because this is happening in the late 60s, at the end of the countercultural movements. You've got the hippies, you've got the interest in Asia. Here comes Bruce Lee. Look, I'm Asian. And there's so much going on there. And then the question of individualism, right? Which you see, people read Rancière's work, and they go, ooh, and I've done it as well. I mean, I've read it, this is all a bit sort of individualist, isn't it? But I also don't think that it is in a very practical sense, because Bruce Lee's approach always involves training with, and inventing with. Bruce Lee's whole critique of martial arts is about the punching the air thing and walking up and down in lines. What's all that about? That's collective. So everyone stands in the park in China and does Tai Chi, or everyone puts their white pajamas on and walks up and down in lines punching. And that's meant to be collective. But that's not collective, that's militaristic, right? So Bruce Lee is like, no, look, you and me, right now, let's sort this out, right? Let's put the pads on and see what works. Does this work? Yep. Probably not. So what will work then? So it's not individualist, it's collective on a very small scale. And it's about, if that kind of thing, then I could waffle on about this all day. I feel I should stop answering, but it reminds me very much of kind of Subcommandant Marcos's answer to all the people who came to Mexico and went, well, what were you meant to do? And he said, well, sort it out your bloody self. We did this in Chiapas. That's what we did, specifically. So you go and do your thing. So I know, I feel I know where you're coming from, and I think your question is right, but I still would say, no, it's not. It's not just. If it's also neoliberal, if it's also ideological, it's not only. Be my answer.
Okay, great question, Jackie.
Hey, thanks for your talk. It was very instructive and great to have the martial arts metaphor, but I think I want to go back to Jacques Rancière's question, because, I mean, I get your point about it doesn't matter if the translation is exactly right, because you read a book and there's something that you took from it, but the missing piece seems to be about ignorance. So I want to, push you back on that a little bit. Some of what I heard in your talk about undisciplining is that it's really important, especially when learning, say, martial arts, that what you learn not become a system that you now are sort of slotted into, that there has to be a different way of learning. And I want to see if you can put that in tension with the argument about ignorance. So the boy knows something that is different from the people who have learned Hebrew. He knows that he no matter what he's learned, he hasn't learned Hebrew. He knows that he has not mastered another language, or that even in speaking another language, he still doesn't know it. And it's that not knowing that sets him apart. So I wonder if you could use that now then to think about what in your martial arts training leaves you in a space of not knowing that actually is a form of emancipation. Not just a different way of learning and a different way of knowing, but an unknowing.
Mm-hmm. I think that there have been kind of paradigm revolutions in martial arts pedagogy, and I think that you can kind of plot the history in broad brush strokes, and it goes from and it has an attendant kind of sort of mindset or belief. So in the olden days, probably in the wake of seeing a Bruce Lee film, people would go, right, I need to learn this thing because it will make me invincible, and I need no longer be scared because I know what I can do, right? And I know that. And then there are many narratives. There's a very familiar narrative about the kind of the destruction of that belief. So, you know, the stories of people who go out and then they'll get their heads kicked in. But they're like, how can I get my head kicked in? I'm a black belt in Taekwondo. That does not compute. And so the fact that the martial discipline failed prompts the paradigm shift, which is not that martial arts can master reality in the sense of knowing, but in the sense of knowing that there will be a surprise and knowing that you will. And I'm saying this now, I'm thinking of Peter Sellers. I'm thinking of, and I'm thinking of, you know, Peter Sellers, Inspector Clouseau tells Cato, attack me at any time. And that's like essentially the new approach to martial arts. Like, you might be in my class, but I might just smash you over the back of the head with something. Because that's how a fight happens in reality. So I think that the status of ignorance in martial arts pedagogy changes. On the one hand, the initial thing is I want to master ignorance. I want to know that I know. But nowadays people know that they don't know. And they go, okay, well, what I'll do is say, I mean, there's the really interesting change to me is the change from this, right, or this, which is a block, to this, as the kind of new sort of dominant. But you're going to be attacked. It's going to take you by surprise. You will curl up. You will. As opposed to before people go, no, I'm going to go, Hiya! And that'll be the end of them because I've smashed their collarbone or sternum or something. But now they go, no, you're going to get hit. Probably right, there's going to be two of them. One of them's going to have to, right, and the other one's going to come in behind and start kicking you. So you go down. So the whole logic of martial arts movement changes because of ignorance. What you have to know is that you don't know. You don't know, but what you do know is that it's going to smash you up, and therefore you don't stand like this anymore. So in terms of the states of ignorance, that would be an answer. I mean, if you wanted to push me on, because I think that you've asked me also something different, which I've lost in translation.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
I think from your last story, Paul, it reminds me how you train or supervise your PhD students. So I wonder whether you practice this ethos in supervising PhD students, because I know that you have a very unique style in supervision, which I benefited a lot from this style, I think. So I just want to hear
I like supervising PhD students because you don't have to teach them. But all you have to do is verify that they've done some stuff. And they turn up and you just kind of go, oh, well, what are you doing? What have you been doing? And they tell you what you've been doing. And you go, okay, what are you going to do next? Well, that sounds right, go on. And then I'll happily take on a PhD project that I don't, like your PhD project, that I don't know everything about. I don't know everything about East-West. I don't know anything about Chinese film studies, but I'm prepared to supervise it because I'm prepared to ask you to verify according to certain kind of disciplinary protocols. Like, all right, what kind of PhD is this going to be? It's going to be like this. Who's going to examine it? If they're going to examine it, it has to look like this. You have to do these things because that's the game that we're playing. But I never teach. Have I taught you anything? No. And you're quite happy with that. I don't teach PhD students. Does anyone teach? I don't teach. Teaching is tell them stories and so on, but I don't know. I don't teach PhD students, I supervise PhD projects and that I help them as a kind of institutional gatekeeper, because I know that they're kind of invested in that institutional process for whatever reason, and I'll help them to get through that.
Okay, we have a question here.
Yeah, hi. I think my question is really very related to the question that you asked, and it's a very simple point that I think I just really want to add on to what was already said, because I think it's very well expressed. Is that it seems to me that the way you're positioning the figure of Bruce Lee is and kind of subjectivity in more general, is in relation to threat. Like it's in relation to kind of an alarmist kind of mentality. There's something coming at you all the time. That actually, in that mindset, people become very manageable, and people become very easy to discipline and to corral. And I suppose that kind of makes me very uncomfortable with regard to what you're suggesting. It's a very simple point.
Well, yeah, and I mean, if we're going to go, this is where Bruce Lee has an affinity with people like Adorno and so on. You know, it's like this is about taking orders and following orders and following instruction. And you go, okay, that's fine. I see how that can happen, but I don't think it necessarily translates smoothly into other realms and registers, because in a sense, I mean, I'm completely docile, plastic sort of a martial arts subject in the sense that I've never really, other than when I've been injured, I've never stopped training. But actually, that makes me into quite an obnoxious and unmanageable person because of the arrogance and the fact that I don't care. Like, I'm in a meeting at work, I don't care. I'm not going to do it. If it sounds too rubbish, it's not going to happen, right? And I think that a lot of that arrogance comes from martial arts training. So I don't think there's a smooth, like, there's this continuity. I think there's discontinuities and disjunctions and differences, right? And I think that, so learning a martial art, yes, it's learning to become disciplined, but you get all of those other benefits as well, which are completely unpredictable. Makes you strong, makes you confident. Yes, maybe individualistic, but also therefore unruly, unmanageable, unpredictable. So I don't think that it's a homogenizing force in an ideological sense. I mean, there is ideology there. Don't get me wrong. I'm thinking now about the story that Google have recently started training their employees in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And they, well, why is the because they know that it's going to make this kind of thing just stimulates you so much and makes you so relaxed about life. You know, strangling each other makes you very relaxed about life. So you go, oh, well, if Google are doing it, therefore it must be ideological and therefore it must be bad. But I don't buy these kind of continuities, and I don't think that the dominoes necessarily go down in these ways. That big thinkers of the macro, like Zizek, would have us believe. I think there's so much more complexity in intimate, singular, or local circumstances. I don't buy that generalizing argument.
Yeah, just one question. I kind of forgot it now. But I'll give it a go again. What interested me about what you were saying was you said that we don't ordinarily say that the body was stupid.
Yep.
I found that a really interesting metaphor. In the sense that we talk linguistically, we say, I said learning by heart, which is a bodily and a linguistic at the same time. And I thought then when, you know, I was thinking about Bruce Lee and what he'd said in interviews before, and I'm sure you know this one, where he said, you know, water, somebody mentioned liquid in the air, water sits into a teapot, am I correct? And then he says, but the water doesn't take the shape of the teapot, so it's fluid.
Yep.
Now, when you talked about the body being stupid, I also thought of the term we say, we talk about muscle memory,
Yep.
and it really triggered something for me, not triggered in that sense, but caught something in my head.
Yeah.
What is it about learning that's bodily? In a sense, I know you're talking about it over and over again, but this memory, a bodily memory, learning, there's a question there somewhere.
Yeah. It's good. This is quite interesting in the sense that the most interesting thing that I ever learned in life was probably Tai Chi, because it completely, and it's so closely, whether ideologically or necessarily, connected to Taoism. because, you know, it all boils down to that kind of, you know, he who knows does not speak, he who speaks does not know, and all this kind of stuff. Because you can say, this is what I'm saying, you can talk, I can talk about Tai Chi now, but the body can't necessarily do the things. You just say, well, just, in the lessons of Tai Chi are incredibly simple, and they often in Tai Chi say, this is, you return to a childlike state, right? You're just having to forget everything you learned as an adult, everything that you were gendered to learn, right? So in life, you know, if someone comes along and pushes me, my reaction, my non-Tai Chi reaction is, and all men do, you see them actually put their chests together, and that's, but the Tai Chi thing is, well, if you want to barge into me like this, then that's perfectly fine, away you go. You'll be resting the floor, that's what you're going to end up resting. So Tai Chi is about, but this can't be, it doesn't go brain, body, it goes body, response to stimuli, like some kind of single-celled organism which moves away from heat or poison or pain. And it has to be that, which can only come about through repetition, not rote, but through repetition, can only through feeling, and it is completely non-wordy, although the linguistic has to be a supplement to that. It's a supplement in the Derridian sense, because my Tai Chi instructor used to say, you have to know this, and you have to be able to say why at the same time, even though the saying is just blah, blah, blah. But you have to be able to say it, otherwise you don't know it. So your body will know it. So a well-trained Tai Chi person will respond in the opposite manner to, say, well-trained Eskrima person, right? And in a sense, I would say now I'm well-trained Eskrima person, I'm completely lost a Tai Chi person. Someone touches me and I think it's a threat, I hit them, which is opposite from Tai Chi, automatically, because my body has forgotten how to do Tai Chi. It's not my brain, it's just, what am I doing? But when I was a builder, I used to work as a builder, and if you hear a clap, then your hand would go over your head, and it would do that automatically. And then when I returned from being a builder one time, and I had a job as a bouncer, and I heard a clattering noise, and my hands went up in my head like that. Whereas these were supposed to be like, oh, what's going on? And because your body, it learns things really quite fast, really very quickly. So what is physical about learning? I don't know.
Okay, so I think that's it. So continue the conversation around which is great. So thank you very much.
Okay, so lunch is outside from 1 to 2, and we'll reconvene back here at 2 p.m.